I'm going to turn it over now to Alex Blanchette from the Anthropology Department, who will be telling you a bit more about the project and about today's event and introduce today's speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Coco. So before I say anything at all, I'll just say when I approached Henry about this, tried to bring it up about a couple months ago, I was thinking, you know, one of the goals here is to make the work that makes the university work visible, right? To bring out all of the different forms of labor, of expertise, of care and knowledge that actually makes everything we do here, including this seminar series, possible. And I think sometimes we don't notice that, right? Or we get in our little bubbles and don't see all of the work going on around us, except for this week, right? Where you can't really miss it. Where just with the massive snowfall, I've just been walking around and just seeing the incredible amount of work that's been going on into this campus. And I just want us to keep that in mind because Henry has probably had quite the week, as we'll probably hear. And I think we should all be very, very thankful for that and that he's here in all weeks this week. So as Coco mentioned, I teach in anthropology here, and along with Sylvia, I help direct this university ecologies project. And in a nutshell, it has many moving pieces and tentacles, as some of you know. But the gist with this project is, first and foremost, we want to insist that the university is an environment. And like most environments, it has natural and it has built elements. And like so many environments, it takes a whole lot of work to maintain. Part of our goal with this project is to get us to see the university, this university, as an environment, and not just always see the environment as something that's out there, or, you know, out, though this is important, out in the ocean or out, you know, in the Midwest or what have you. We also want to try to push to get us to see to the degree to which universities in general, American higher education, has had a really pivotal role in shaping the planet, both in terms of its own campuses, but the ways that its own knowledge projects have been kind of undergirding many ecological transformations. Third, we also have a proposition that we could maybe start to think together about how to do this differently. And our premise, if you will, is that a good starting point is to start to learn how to think across differences, across different units, departments, and rethink maybe what the university might be in the first place. I'll probably note this in my questions, but I think we spend a lot of time, I'm looking at Hassan, thinking about how, you know, engineering and anthropology or biology and history might think together. But we don't spend as much time asking, you know, how could dining and students work together? How could facilities and faculty from different units work together? How could we make this a university in an ambitious sense? And so all just to say, this is kind of one of the events we've really cared about and have been looking forward to. We hope to start building some dialogue. So when I think about the Hope Cunningham lectures that I think have been running now for 14 years, which by my calculation is like some 300 lectures, they tend to have, I think, 3 goals, but we rarely, if ever, and probably wouldn't want to, accomplish them all in one session. So the first goal is to give students a sense of potential environmental careers, right? To see what they could do. The second sense is to platform changing senses of environmental thought. And the third is to begin to think across differences, think across different disciplines, fields, backgrounds, and occupations. We rarely manage to do that in one session, but I think we're going to kind of try today. So the gist is we're going to do this in 3 parts, kind of past, present, and future. We're going to talk a bit about Henry's background, what brought him to Tufts, talk some more about the pleasures and the challenges of managing and working Tufts as a landscape, and then maybe begin to open up for some ideas, some potential ideas as to what the Tufts campus, the Tufts landscape could look like in the future. And with that, I will stop talking, except to ask Henry, your official title is Campus Services Manager. Could you tell us a little bit about what that means and what it entails?
Sure. Well, yeah, first, just wanted to say thank you for inviting me to speak here. I think it's a great opportunity to kind of share what we do in facilities and maybe just, like you said, connect us with informing students like what we do and what goes into maintaining this place. But Yeah, for campus services, it's sort of a newer position for me, but campus services uh, envelops grounds, trash removal, custodial contracts, snow removal. We do event setups. We also do internal campus moves. So we will move furniture from one office to another. And then we are just kind of like the utility crew that if something needs to be get done, like it just comes to us and we figure it out. So um, it's kind of endless what we're responsible for. And I probably have one of the bigger crews within facilities. So like I always have labor staff that's more than willing to jump in where we need to. So it definitely keeps it entertaining for sure. Like every day is different. And, you know, we never really have too many slow days.
So let's go back to the start. We've spoken before. Your career's taken you a lot of places, and we'll get there. But if I'm not mistaken, and please do correct me if I'm mischaracterizing this, your background is in landscaping, right? And landscape architecture.
Yes.
How did you land on that as a path way back when, whether it's college or before? What made you sort of sit and say, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, it was kind of on accident. You know, in high school, I had learned about a job up the street from where I grew up, working for a landscaper. And so I did that in high school during the summers, and I worked full time for him in the summer, mostly doing like landscape maintenance and some smaller like construction project work. And I did that through sophomore or senior year in high school. And then when it came time to go to college, I had looked at a few schools and had landed at the Stockbridge School of Agriculture at UMASS. And at the time, I wasn't super thrilled to be going there, but it was just the option that was available to me at the time. And for me, landscaping was not really a career; it was just a summer job, you know. And but once I went to the Stockbridge School, um, there I started to take a botany class and a trees, plants in the landscape class, a landscape forms class, and different design classes, and it just kind of like changed the way that I looked at the landscape. And what's really cool about the Stockbridge School is your spring freshman semester, they require you to take an internship, and you are only in school for 7 weeks. And then that remainder of the 7 weeks of the spring semester, you go and take that internship. I ended up going back and working for the landscape construction company that I was already working for, but we had to like document 5 projects that we did that summer, and we had to take plant clippings to make like our own kind of like plant ID book. And so it just, yeah, changed the way I looked at things. And Stockbridge School was a 2-year program. Once I finished the school, I was still really like interested in learning, and you had the option to transfer into the university, and you could go for environmental design, urban planning, landscape architecture, and landscape architecture interested me the most. So I transferred in with some other students that were also at the Stockbridge School, and it just was great because we had like a small group of guys that like had come through the program together. It felt like a bit of an extension of high school. And you know, UMass is just huge, but like I knew a solid core guys that I'd been in school with for 5 years. And the design just continued to I learned more. We took more studio classes. Things revolved around residential design or community design, urban planning. And then after school, like I wasn't really sure where I was going to go for a career, and I was given an opportunity to go out to Nantucket and work there. So I worked on a grounds crew out at this place called the Westmore Club, and it was basically like a tennis club. And I lived on the property, and it changed. Like I just enjoyed being on the same property every day, seeing it throughout the season, and like kind of taking ownership of the property, you know. And so I was there for a couple of years. And then I took a job that was a little bit different for me as like a first mate for a private family. They had bought this yacht down in Florida, and I worked on the yacht for like a year and a half. And that was just like a really cool experience. We were in Florida. We took the boat from Florida back to Nantucket, Nantucket back to Florida. And I just did like a little bit of everything. Like I did some landscaping at their house. I worked on the boat. I did some carpentry stuff. Like it was just, we did whatever needed to be done. And then I worked for a landscape company back on Nantucket, which was more of a management position. And we were the largest landscape company on Nantucket. And we had 400 properties out there that we were responsible for the maintenance. And it was, that just then felt like now the island was kind of mine, and so it was just really cool to go to all these different properties and see them change throughout the year. And we'd be doing construction projects and seeing those get built from start to finish, how they responded 2 or 3 years later after we did the planting design or things that worked or didn't work. And then I, was kind of ready to move off island and got a job here in Woburn. I worked for a design build company up in Woburn, and they did some really phenomenal design and build for some higher end residential properties. I was more on the maintenance side of things, but it was obviously different than being on Nantucket. We were in like greater metro Boston, and there was a lot of driving that I had to do, and it just was a bit of a slower pace. And the job at Tufts for a groundskeeper, I saw it advertised, and I had kind of been thinking like it might be good for me to get back out in the field a little bit. And so I applied for the position, and at the time pay was important to me, and it was similar to what I was already making as that management position. And so I took the opportunity, and it was really great. Like I loved being on the campus and working with the crew, mowing the lawn, doing spring cleanup, all these kind of things. And so I had been on the crew for about 6 or 7 months, and then the grounds manager position opened, and I applied and was really fortunate to get the position. And it was difficult at the time because I was having so much fun, like being on the crew and enjoying where I was, but I just knew that that position might not become available again. So it was kind of my opportunity. And yeah, it's just sort of evolved from here. And I really enjoy being here. There's always something going on, like I said, and being involved and asking for my input has been really, sometimes maybe I don't think I have a lot to offer, or like, but it's been cool that people come to me and ask me questions, and, things that I mentioned can be actually implemented. So yeah, I've really enjoyed being here.
Thank you. A bit random, but just going back for a second, just out of curiosity, you moved up with like a cohort of fellow peers through landscape architecture and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Are they, what are they up to? Did they continue on the path as well?
Yeah, so a lot of the guys that I had gone to the Stockbridge School were guys that had, similar to me, were working landscape jobs in high school, or maybe their father had a landscape company and they wanted to get a degree to just kind of broaden their understanding of landscape. So some of those guys, after 2 years, that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to get the degree. They took over their family's business. And then the other guys now, like one guy has started his own landscape company back in Western Mass. 2 of the others, one of my roommates, like he worked for different landscape companies. He was in North Carolina doing landscape construction design. Now he's in Utah doing the same thing. And then another is doing property maintenance out in Colorado, landscape property maintenance. So, but there is always a bit of design element that comes into those kind of things, So I know it maybe not like is as big as you would think landscape architecture is, but like kind of what our background was and the guys that I went to school with, like where we brought value is like we built a lot of these landscapes. So like we knew, what would go into them, and like we can look at a drawing and go like, yeah, that looks great on paper, but it may not work in practice, So, it was kind of interesting coming from like that construction type of background. And then we went to school with kids that maybe didn't have that same background. But it was a good collaboration of like, they maybe could think more creatively than us, but we could help like, all right, that's a great idea, but how do we actually get it built, or what makes sense? So yeah, I mean, I think that there's just a range of opportunity within the landscape field.
Well, let's move to Tufts for a second. So I said before, I think a lot of people, at least on the academic side, might not think of it as an environment, right? Except perhaps when something goes wrong, like a huge snowstorm, a water main breaks or something like that, the environment reveals itself. But it strikes me like it's a big campus. It's probably bigger, but it's not a small campus. It seems like it's a pretty unique landscape, right? With the hills and so forth. And I just want to ask broadly, maybe too broadly, what you see as some of the challenges and pleasures of working this particular landscape, or perhaps like what surprised you relative to the other places you'd worked when you first started working here? Yeah.
Yeah, I think like challenges are, like you said, the elevation is just a challenge for sure. You know, like right now I'm part of a group we're looking at how to improve accessibility on campus. Like how do you get from the athletic fields up the hill over to the campus center? And like the best solution would just be like cut the hill down, you know, but obviously we can't do that. So, you know, but that just presents a challenge. And how do people move around the hill? How do we get from the bottom to the top in an efficient way and that's accessible for everybody? And then, you know, the things that you would think that, all right, we're in this same area, like it is a big campus, but like you said, there are bigger. But the weather can be different, like on different parts of campus. Like, you know, our office is down here on Boston Ave, and if we're getting an ice event or snow event, like I can look out the window there and think everything's fine, and then I take a ride up onto the academic quad, and like the res quad is just completely iced over. And you know, it's like you have these very different microclimates here, and then as the sun moves around the campus, like especially in the winter, there's areas that get better sun than others. So like the ice may not be as prevalent over here. Stormwater management is certainly another challenge as well. Just because we aren't out, like something that we maybe created up on the hill, we think we've solved the water issue there, but maybe now we've created a problem down on lower campus because we've diverted the water in a way that just ends up somewhere else that you don't necessarily think about right away. So I think there's things that we continue to learn. Also, like just the amount of, like you mentioned, the water break, like just utilities. Like there's so many utilities underground, whether that's steam, power, water, that, you know, those kind of dictate what we can and can't do as well.
So you might disagree with this based on your own experiences and expertise. But when I think of the Tufts environment, I think of lawns. I think of like, you know, increasingly growing more or less uniform lawns. We'll get to this in a bit. I think we're both open, maybe somewhat skeptical of universal lawns, or at least open to other possibilities. But I wanted to start by asking, you know, from your perspective, both as grounds worker or as manager, what's good about lawns? You know, what's useful about lawns? Pleasurable working with lawns?
Yeah, I'd say lawns are they're generally pretty resilient, you know, and like the programming that we have on this campus, like there's so many lawn spaces that just get continued use throughout the year, whether that's for spring fling, commencement, other career fairs and things like that, that the lawn can like take that event. We can come and aerate and overseed, and 2 weeks later, it's like the event never happened. You know, what's also like, I had thought about this a little bit more, like the lawns on this campus make sense because of the utilities, you know, like because a steam leak breaks, we can rip up the lawn, dig into the ground, and then replace the lawn when we're done. Whereas like, you know, it's to think about planting more trees and all this, they are great ideas, but you have to then, what we have to consider is what's underground there. And inevitably that utility may need to be taken care of, and now that tree has to be removed. So I think that the lawn has its function here, and there's areas that they are useful and important. And I think like just maintaining a lawn, like, you know, as somebody that has mowed lawns or treated lawns, like, you know, when you get a nice lawn growing and it looks good, like there is something enjoyable to that, you know, especially on like Craft Field, which is our practice soccer field. We maintain that at a really high level. A couple of years ago when they were coming to scout around for the World Cup. Like they had come and looked at Craft Field as a potential like practice field for some of the countries that were going to be around. And I remember that the scout came and was so impressed with the quality of our turf there that, and just to hear that kind of feedback, it didn't work out just because it's not big enough and, you know, there are buses and locker rooms and all these kind of things. But just to, you know, hear that like our work was validated was really good for me and more so for our crew, because they're the ones that put in all the work. And, you know, I think to have it recognized was really cool for them.
So it sounds like you'd push back on my sort of statement that it's just all lawns, right? There's actually like pretty different kinds of lawns and different approaches to lawns, and actually, you know, making this grow based on the microclimates, based on the different needs and so
Yeah.
forth.
Yeah. And I think like our lawn, you know, a lot of our lawns that are, you know, Craft Field is unique in that the type of activity it gets and how often we're mowing it and all these things. But some of our other lawns are, you know, the maintenance that goes into them is really not that involved actually. You know, it's just we're mowing them weekly. We mow at a higher height of cut so that we're not mowing as frequently, that the lawn can withstand things, droughts and hot, warmer temperatures better. So, and we don't, there's not a ton of fertilizer input from those lawns. And then, you know, we're starting to look at it more of like, are there areas that we could even do less maintenance? So, you know, I would say that they're not all treated in the same way and in the same capacity. It depends on where they are, what kind of use they get, and how important they are to like the aesthetic of the landscape as well.
I have a very academicish sounding question. So basically, there's this historian named Richard White. I'm going to get in trouble by some in the crowd, maybe. You know, he sort of bemoans 1990s environmentalism as he imagines it. He sort of says, you know, these environmentalists of the 1990s, they couldn't imagine that someone who actually works with the land, who actually transforms the land, is an environmentalist, because for them, an environmentalist was someone who makes no changes, that only like enjoys nature, is recreational on the land. And White's big push is that like this is a profound problem to people who would be environmentalists, precisely because it's the people who work with and engage the land, farmers, various landscapers, anything, that actually know it best, right? That actually know the specific qualities of the land itself. And in my abstract way, I guess I wanted to ask you if you consider the work of landscaping and the work you do to be environmental or environmentalist in that sense, or less broadly, like how has landscaping, if at all, made you think about sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, I think like landscaping can be very broad, yeah. And, you know, sometimes I've considered how sustainable is landscaping generally, you know. I think some of these bigger like commercial landscape companies that, you know, can be profit driven, obviously, you know, like what's the sustainability in that, and how environmentally beneficial are those, is that type of landscaping. I think that you're seeing a shift in, you know, our traditional practices, and there are companies out there that are looking at more lower maintenance types of landscaping and plants that are being used, less water, less fertilizer, just the equipment that is being used to maintain the landscape. You know, are there more sustainable equipment that we can use that are less detrimental, or noise, things like that. So I think that it's definitely shifting, but because you know, at the end of the day, a lot of landscape companies, they're there to make money. So, you know, if we generate landscapes that require less maintenance, then there's less money to be made. And I also think like some of those things with landscape, it's hard for, you know, I'm talking more of in the private landscape sector. Like if you go to a homeowner and tell them like, you know, we're going to install this low maintenance landscape, there's a development period that is going to take 4 or 5 years for you to actually, you know, realize that landscape and realize those benefits. And there's a larger upfront cost to those kind of things that I think for some people it's hard to fully absorb right away. And it just makes more sense to let's just keep maintaining it as it is because it's more beneficial for me as a homeowner financially. Where I think in a university setting or other like ground settings where, you know, this place isn't going anywhere. So we have a better opportunity to think about those things a little bit more long term. And, you know, there's opportunity for us to try things that, yeah, maybe it's going to take a few years of establishment, but 20 years from now, we can really understand and look at that and say that created a real difference, you know? So I think like, yeah, the landscaping broadly, there are elements of it that are maybe not so environmentally friendly. But I think that there are other areas that continue to like improve and is certainly top of mind for people in the industry.
If I don't ask it, someone else is going to, so I'm sorry. What is your take on leaf blowers?
Yeah, I mean, leaf blowers serve a purpose for sure. There's just no better piece of equipment for cleaning up leaves than a leaf blower. So it's like, it's hard to break away from that. And I think that goes back to like the traditional landscape, you know, and, you know, as much as we try to like, you know, myself included, like think about somewhere else, it's like you try a different piece of equipment and you go back to that blower and you're just like, well, this just works so well, you know, at what I need it to do. So it's hard to just kind of break out of that routine and try to change something and do something differently. You know, I think that the battery powered blowers are coming along and they're getting a lot better. It's just the issue that we run into is like runtime. So, you know, if we're out blowing leaves for 6 hours a day, like it can't perform as quickly as or as efficiently as a gas powered blower. But there's other pieces of equipment that we've tried to use that we put pushers on some of our mowers so that we're pushing big piles of leaves and we're not using a blower as much. Trying to be more strategic on maybe where can we leave leaf piles and we don't have to blow everything. You know, I think blowers too, like they create another issue that we don't really think about is just like all the dust particles and erosion that we, you know, it's miniature erosion, but like we're causing erosion. So those are things that I think about as well. You know, I think it's just been so ingrained to part of the landscape kind of industry and maintenance practice that it's just going to be really hard to break out of. So.
Sorry, this thought and question just came to me, but you know, obviously you're managing a university, which is different than someone's lawn, so forth for landscaping, and obviously there's an aesthetic to universities, right? There's a way a university should look, right? How has that been taught to you or communicated to you, or where have you sort of picked up that like, you know, a campus should look this way or not?
Yeah, there are standards too, APA standards dictate how the type of maintenance that certain buildings should get, how often they're being mowed, how often maybe we're doing the fertilizing, weed cleanup, how many, like it can actually get into like how often annuals and different color arrangements should be changed out every single year. And I think you can, you know, dictate like, all right, let's take Ballou Hall or Barnum Hall, like this is like our premier building and this is how often we should be changing out the annuals in the front, and this is how often it should get weeded, and you know, what are other areas of the campus that maybe aren't such a central focus and can withstand maybe less maintenance. But I think that like the campus here, the academic quad to me is like, that's the area where it's just, that's like so traditionally what a campus should look like. And I think that, you know, that's just kind of standardized across universities around the country. And I think we strive to have that similar look. And, but I think, you know, there's areas outside of that we can think differently. And I think we're not the only ones that are doing that. I think you can look at other campuses that are doing similar things. And I think that goes back to just how we think about it as well. Like it's just maybe traditionally it was like you want everything clean, clean lawn, the plants are clean, lines are clean, but you know, I think people are starting to think differently, and there's value in like a more native, unkept landscape. But it's just it can look unruly and messy at first, and getting people to, you know, change their perspective on that, I think is just going to take time as well.
Well, let's start moving there, but let's start with work, actually. You know, you've worked at many places. You also worked on the Tufts ground. And I assume if I asked this question, many people would have different answers. Many people on the grounds crew or what have you would have different answers, and sometimes they would conflict. But from your perspective, what kind of landscape is more interesting to work, is more pleasurable to work, is, you know, what kind of landscape would result in a better working experience as you see it for our colleagues?
I think something that like just has variety, you know, like has a range in the landscape that, you know, I think for us, for me, the landscape company I worked for prior to this, the landscapes I went to were so different just because of the area that we worked. You know, we were like, we'd be up on the North Shore, up in Rockport or Gloucester, and then you'd go down further out into Brookline or Newton, and then that landscape is different. And then we would do rooftop gardens in the city, and that's different. And so it just, you know, and you can see things that work in one area that doesn't work somewhere else. And I think like just having variety, I think Tufts offers quite a bit of that variety, and in that there are areas to the outsides of this campus that are a little bit more native, and we can actually the method in which we maintain those areas is different than maybe on the academic quad. You know, like some of the areas around like the athletic fields, we get to use a brush cutter down there, and it's like you're cutting 3 feet of brush down, whereas like on the academic quad, we're mowing 3 inches of grass, and it's just a different experience. You know, here with the snow removal, we get to use different pieces of equipment for that, and but we also get to do change outs for annuals and planting design. We have people on our crew that really enjoy that kind of thing, and we send them to a plant nursery. We let them pick out what the spring annuals are, and they can think kind of in their head of like, all right, how is this going to be arranged in front of the sign bed or in a planter? So I think just allowing like something that just doesn't feel repetitive all the time is something to me that's always been important to me. And I think just what makes Tufts special to me, and also like just other careers that I've had, is just being at the same property over and over again. And that gives you some ownership and feeling like this is my property. This is like, maybe I don't own it, but like because I'm working the landscape, I feel some sense of ownership over it.
And to that end, if we started thinking beyond the lawns towards more diverse parts of campus, or at least in pockets, what are some of the challenges there? You started to bring them up in terms of unruliness and so forth, but what strikes you as plausible? What strikes you or desirable in terms of you know, what and where and how could we imagine a slightly different landscape in the future?
Yeah, I do think that like some of the edges of campus could be more native, and there could be more plantings there. And it could help us really start to feel like the Tufts campus is separate from what it is surrounding of it. You know, I think like some of our edges of campus you get lost kind of like, am I still on Tufts campus, or am I in Somerville now, or am I where, you know, so I think that there's opportunities for us to create sort of an edge or a border to campus that would make it feel more unique and more of a sense of arrival for us. There's areas like that, the Memorial Hill, or some of the hills over by the residential quad and Carmichael and things like that, where they are a real challenge to maintain because of the environment that they currently are. And like, how can we think about that differently, that provides like an aesthetic value, provides something that just we don't have to maintain as often, but there is benefit to it as well. So I think like whether that's more native plantings, more trees, just less maintenance in general, but it's just that is just something that people would need to think about and look at differently. And it's just then what kind of like other things are we inviting, like wildlife and potential other issues that we just haven't thought about. So I think there's plenty of that opportunity. It's just giving it time and putting it into practice, trying like a smaller area and seeing how it works. And then, I think back to the point about, well, could we just not maintain everything? I think some of that is dictated by the infrastructure here on the campus and utilities that are underground, that it's just, some of the way the campus is maintained is because of that infrastructure that's there. And, we just can't allow it to get unruly and put different things there, because in 2 or 3 years, we're probably going to have to rip it out because we're going to have to get to that steam line, or we're going to have to get to that underground water. But I think that there's areas where there are less utilities and there's less, there's more of that opportunity to try these different ideas.
Not to put you on the spot too much, but you've said a few times, part of the issue is just changing how people see the environment, or see how they see a desirable environment. Who are those people in some senses? Like, what are the people that the campus is serving, and whose kind of opinion in these matters really do matter?
Yeah, I think that's a hard question. I don't know if there's any specific group, but I think some of it does come down to like, projects that get built maybe initially, like the landscape is designed in a way that like, oh, we're going to do all these plantings, and we're going to do, a native design over here and less lawn. And then as the project develops and gets built, landscape is always kind of the last thing, right? So, the budget all of a sudden was this when the project started, and now it's this. And those initial grand designs for landscape, well, we don't have the money anymore, and now we're just going to do lawn and, a more simple, easier to install landscape, just because the budget didn't allow it. So I also think like, some of our crew a little bit too is like, they might look at something, it looks like a mess. Like, I want to maintain it. I want it to look more clean. So, they take pride in how things look. And so just to look at something and go like, no, it's okay that it looks this way, and I think that's an example of that as well. And, I think we get requests sometimes for, well, the front of the building it doesn't look like how it normally did. Can your crew come and clean it up? And so there's just a perception for people that maybe they've worked at a certain building for so long, or an area campus that has just always looked this way, and now it's just different, to where it's just, it's a change in how they perceive it. So I think there's areas that some of that's been done already and it's been successful, like the native pollinator gardens down at 574. I know people really love those. And over here at TTC, or on the patio, the front of JCC, these are some more drought tolerant, sort of less mulch, less traditional plantings. And I think the more you do that in smaller increments, people they're not that they don't notice, but it just becomes part of what the campus looks like. And you don't really give it too much secondary thought.
Thank you. Last question for me, and then we'll open up from questions for the audience. I want to go back to just where I started. And I don't have the answer to here, and I have a grant that is supposed to provide the answer to this. But you've spent as much time on this campus as a whole as anyone, right? And I mean that in the sense that, like, as an anthropologist on this campus, I get around, but I'm really in like 2 or 3 buildings, right? I am like really focused on a particular place. And, we bemoan this in environmental studies, a kind of interdisciplinary field. We're constantly saying, we shouldn't be a university. We should be a university. We should find some ways for the biologists and the anthropologists to think together. We should think interdisciplinarily. But I want to just ask more broadly about a university as I started, and how you might imagine ways that facilities and grounds and so forth could work and think with students on projects or with faculty. You know, what ways might you imagine different kinds of collaboration or breaking down some of the, I don't know if barriers is the right word, but just some of the different silos on campus?
Yeah, man, I think that the crew that I work with, really enjoy the work that they do. And I think when asked about the work that they do, like, you know, they'd be more than happy to answer questions from students if they see us doing something and they're just interested in, why are you doing it this way? Or, you know, I know there are guys on our crew, guys and girls in our crew that would love to answer those questions. And, you know, a couple of years ago, we did some planting with the pollinator group, and that was a really interesting experience for both the student group and our crew, because you know, there was things that they learned from the students, and they understood like how important it was for this landscape to get installed. So, and I think that just helped build a community, and then knowing like the value that it carries for that group, like then it helps up my crew maintain it in a different way. And I think too, just like letting people in facilities, whether it's the trades personnel or our grounds crew or our utility crew, like, you know, letting them know like how valued the work is that they do. It's like today, like with this snow, for example, you know, it's been ongoing. Our guys have been doing a great job and putting in tons of hours. And, you know, so just for somebody to say, you know, I know when we're out there shoveling and somebody walks by and just says, thank you, like it goes a long way for us. And, you know, it just does actually feel like it then, and that's in the sense that it feels like a university, and, you know, we're doing this for a purpose. You know, it's not like I'm just coming and shoveling your driveway so that you pay me kind of thing. You know, we have safety in mind. We have the university in mind. We want everyone to have a good experience when they're here. And that goes to setting up events and all the other community engagement that we're involved in. So I think it's just like having us involved, asking us questions, like, and also like when we get into designs and other things like that, I think what we've got better about is like coming to our crew and coming to people in facilities of like, we're thinking about putting in this HVAC unit, or we're thinking about trying these and just saying, no, those things are really hard to maintain, or like, how do I get to that unit after you put it there? And, you know, and not just designing something without considering how it gets worked on. And I think that just adds to that collaborative effort.
Thank you. Let's open it up for questions. Am I running the mic too?
Thank you, Henry. I have so many questions. As someone who also worked in greenhouses and landscape architecture for all of high school and college, I appreciate the sort of transition into this role that you've had. I wonder, it's hard to pick which questions I want to ask. So I want to talk about trees and I want to talk about concrete. But I'm also curious, like if you could do anything, finances aside, what would you change about the landscape of the campus to make it aesthetic or more environmental, or like what would be your pie in the sky dream about this campus that you could do? And also, what's your least favorite tree and why is there so much concrete?
Yeah, I mean, I think just being able to plant more trees would be something that is interesting to me, and would like, if money was not an issue, like I think there's just so much more opportunity for more trees on this campus. And, you know, I like a vision for the Memorial Hill of like how that could feel more like native woodland. Like it doesn't have to be so much lawn, and that could just I think that would just change the aesthetic of how the campus feels, and then could create that surrounding, like I said, to where like the academic quad really does feel like its own environment. And just creating like some more terrace landscape in that hill, and there's opportunity for like you just get some really cool views, different areas of campus that you just don't really think about until you're there, and just envisioning a landscape space in some of those areas, so that maybe I know the area, but other people can experience it as well. And I think like there's some cool opportunities to create different like walking paths to where like the community could use, neighborhood could use, like, you know, I could envision like a path that goes all the way around the athletic field, and that just becomes like an area that people can go for a walk. And like, there's just unused space that is available that we're just probably not maintaining it, or we just haven't thought about it in a different way. And it's just, oh, that's the edge of campus. So there's nothing, we can't do anything there, you know? And yeah, the answer to concrete, I mean, I think like there's just so much pedestrian traffic here that concrete is the best solution in a lot of those areas. We are definitely thinking about alternatives to concrete, more permeable pavers and things like that. But where do those permeable pavers make sense? And I think the concrete goes back to that same thing about utilities as well, underground utilities. And, you know, once you rip up concrete, you can rip up a panel and replace that panel pretty easily. But if that was all permeable paver and that had to be excavated, is it going to go back the same way? Is it as easily to remove and replace as maybe concrete or asphalt is? So concrete is, you know, for that reason, is a great tool, great material. But I think that there are opportunities for other materials that when we do design new projects, we are thinking about those things for sure.
First, I just want to say thank you for this conversation. It was very enlightening. I had a question about more of like your perspective about like wholly synthetic surfaces. For instance, several of the sports field are made up of astroturf is maybe the best I could describe. I was wondering your opinion, you know, cost benefit of that. How do you decide whether that's a good idea or not? Obviously, it's been linked to like some health problems with all the loose rubber bits and stuff like that. So I was wondering just like your perspective on surfaces like that.
Yeah, I think in New England, they make a lot of sense, especially for spring sports, like baseball. The baseball field makes sense for us because if it's a nice day out there in January, a natural grass baseball field is probably unplayable because it's gone through this freeze thaw cycle of now like the infield is all mud, you can't play on it. But the turf is not going to experience that same freeze thaw cycle, and like the team can get out there a lot sooner. You know, there's a lot less rain delays, there's a lot less weather involvement. But, you know, I think a natural grass field just plays completely differently. It feels differently. I know it from the perspective of our crew that maintains it. There's just something so much more satisfying about dragging an infield and, you know, putting in new clay and packing the mound and, you know, all these kind of things. But there's more maintenance, obviously, that goes into that. I think what people are beginning to experience, it's not like unique to Tufts, but like synthetic turf has a useful life of like 8 to 12 years, you know, so it's like that field is going to have to be replaced at some point, and there's a cost associated of that, of course. And like, yeah, maybe there's less maintenance year over year, but like you're going to have to replace that field, and there's you know, a heavy budget associated with that, to where a natural grass field, yeah, you may be spending more maintenance yearly, but that cost actually over time may be less than a synthetic field. So I think you probably, in areas where they maybe don't experience as big of a climate change as we do seasonally, I think you might see a reversion back to more natural grass because of that, what we're learning. And then also, like, once you do remove that old turf, where does it go? You know, I think that there's a lot of conversation about where that old carpet ends up, and how can it be recycled and reused. So there's a lot of conversation around that. that I think you'll see continue to change over time.
And no one panic. We have a Tufts test coming out, I think. If everyone's cell phones start ringing.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Henry. Yeah, I think I want to build off Alex's last question and maybe the first question from the audience. Just in terms of what's possible, you talked about a lot about infrastructural or constraints of like underground utilities and maybe like the streets and neighborhoods surrounding Tufts, but maybe like with or without those constraints, like if we had like windmills or solar power, geothermal wells, like, and could get rid of like the underground utilities, like what would be possible? I'm thinking like, could we have like microforest or like more like a farm or more gardens or like composting toilets or like an outdoor classroom? Like what is possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think like all of those things are possible. You know, I think the microforest is something that's where like talking about Memorial Hill, like that's something that I would think about as a microforest. And I think that again, to the edges of campus, there's opportunity for those kind of microforests. And like just for us talking about landscaping, like those microforests can then also create benefit for us to be an area where like natural composting happens, you know, and we don't have to be hauling so much landscape material off of campus. It can just be either taken to those microforests and left there and just composted naturally, and so that cuts down on our carbon footprint because we're not hauling so much landscape material away. It's just for here, it comes down to like space and what's available, and like is putting a microforest in an area more important than maybe putting a science building, or you know, so I look at an area that doesn't have anything on it yet, and that's yet, you know, like there's a about 10-year plan to put a building there or put a res hall there. So those are things that, you know, provide constraints. But I think solar power is definitely something that gets talked about and definitely gets explored where available. And, you know, I think more green roofs is probably something that we could think about as well. So I think there's all kinds of opportunity, definitely.
Thank you for your talk. I've been thinking about what you were saying about like what you enjoy doing on campus, like how you, or the positives of like the aesthetically pleasing aspects of the landscape, and how you're talking about like the different types of tools and utilities that you can use on like depending on the diversity of what landscape is or what landscaping you're doing. And then you also mentioned how it was really cool to work with the students for the pollinator garden and see how they interact with the space and what they get from it. So I'm curious about like this concept of human relationships to the land and to nature, and your thoughts on like how the Tufts landscape is conducive or not conducive to the Tufts community engaging with the landscape and building connection to the land. And maybe also if you could share like your own relationship to the land and like how your job does or does not allow you to build a relationship with nature.
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly like the student body has a relationship to the environment here in the landscape. You see that evident during snow. Like President's Hill is like probably the best sledding hill in the 10-mile radius, and everybody comes out, and there's an experience there with the landscape that I don't think you get elsewhere. And I think those things, like it seems so simple, but like it is really does bring value to people. And I think that creating those spaces where people can get outside of their dorm or outside of a classroom and maybe take a classroom outside, you know, I think like the TTC patio, like on a day like today where the sun is hitting it, like, it's warm to be there than it might be in somewhere else, and taking those things into consideration of like, this is a nice place for people to be and get outside and like just feel the sun on them, and I think that there's those things that we have to consider. And to me, like, the landscape, I see it change throughout the year, and there's areas that I enjoy being on in the spring than maybe I would in winter. And I think like just to continue to build on them and making sure that like there are spaces that people are going to enjoy, and you can just reflect back on and think about when you do have your own home or you're in a different landscape, like you've seen something that works here that maybe could translate to somewhere else. And vice versa too. Like you've seen something somewhere else that maybe could really translate here. And I think like the introduction of different buildings, like the JCC is still a relatively new building. The new dorm hall that's getting built is going to change kind of like how people interact with the landscape, and thinking about that and as well, and how much more usage different areas are going to get. So I think you just see it evolve as like the needs of the university change, or areas in which people are spending more of their time change as well. So.
One last.
Hello, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed hearing your this lecture. This is kind of a specific question, but I was always curious. There's some kochia dogwood trees by the Hillside apartment, and I was always curious why those trees were chosen, because they're native to Asia, usually. And also, if you want to like talk further about the process that goes into picking specific tree species for different parts of campus, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I think the kochia dogwood like was so popular like in the 80s, 90s, and like you just see it everywhere, that it's a really interesting tree, like the bark that it has, how it flowers. It just provides like seasonal interest throughout the year, and I think that's the reason it was chosen, and I think it's not unique to Tufts. You'll see those trees everywhere just because of that reason. And I think at a certain time, it was just some landscape architect learned that tree in school, and he was like, I'm just going to put it in all my planting designs. And that's how a lot of these plants become popular, like right now, like sweet spire and grasses and yarrow are like super popular, and you see them everywhere. And, I think that they are native plants and they respond really well. But I do think like, just because a kochia dogwood is not native to this area, it doesn't mean that it can't respond well. Where it is native to, the environment may be similar to here, or the environment may be harsher to here, and it's going to thrive really well here. I think like the conversation around like only using native plants, like it feels a little bit too small. Like I feel like we have to think more about like what are things that do well, like and just because a plant is native to here, it doesn't mean it's native to a super harsh urban environment where it's going to get trampled, where it's going to get salt from the road, where it's going to get all kind of other things that it normally wouldn't in a perfect environment. So those are things that come into consideration for us. Like, there's areas that I know get a lot of road salt. And so when I'm thinking about plants, I might actually think something about that does really well in a beach environment, because it's just getting hit with salt all the time. And I think you see that around other areas too, like around the city. They will experiment with different plants that might respond to that specific microclimate area more. And so, yeah, those are things that we take into consideration. I think Somerville's done a really good job of identifying trees that work well in an urban environment. So I will refer to that list at certain times. And then just in my own experience, I've planted things that don't do well, or there's trees that I just don't like. And so I just, I will stray away from those kind of things. And, you see trees that they maybe look good when they're first planted, but 20 or 30 years from now, they create all this dead wood, or they're just messy trees. And it's just, we try to stay away from those kind of things. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I think we need to have a session on like the history, ongoing history of Tufts trees. I think that could be really interesting. But thank you, Henry. Really appreciate it. Thank you.